Welcome to another episode of Rooftop Conversations. So I have actually someone here I met in college, and she's really killing the game out there. I've seen this person, you know, do all these different things on her Instagram, and she's winning awards like left and right. And it's a super amazing role model, at least for me, in the STEM field. So please welcome my next guest, Fatima Khalid. And I'm gonna let her introduce herself. So Fatima.
Hi, May. Thanks so much for having me. I am a programmer. I currently work in San Francisco for a company called Pantheon. I currently do developer relations, so it's like an exciting new career path for me where I do a lot of technical work where I'm building code platforms for people to use. But the other half of my job is engaging with open source communities and building the things that people need. And so it's kind of a new thing that I'm doing, but I think it's been really exciting.
That's really cool. I think like you're doing so much. So like we both, I think we never really physically met. I mean, we probably ran into each other at college, but it was never. I think it was everything was very online. So I like feel like even to this day, I'm still not tracking. This sounds kind of creepy, but I'm looking at all the stuff you've been doing online. It's really cool. So if you can just talk about like you and I both know like our undergrad where we went to school was predominantly male. That's like
Mhm.
one of the biggest things that I mean nowadays is better, but back when you and I went to school,
Yeah.
there was a lot of it was very male dominated and things like that, especially in the field of computer science, computer engineering. So I would love to know like well, one, why did you choose a career in computer science, computer engineering program? Like, why this field? And what was your experience like as a woman, a Muslim woman in STEM, and especially in such a male-dominated field? And I would love to hear your experiences with that.
So I think we may, before I start on that, I think we met once in school for some volunteering thing for women's engineering.
Of
I'm
course.
not 100% sure, but I definitely also stalked your Instagram for a really long time because I really appreciated, we were going on a tangent, but I really
No, no,
appreciated
this is fine. I like that. I like the organic for this. Yeah.
I really appreciated your post because I think when I was in school, I had a hard time like taking up space. And when I read your Instagram, you very openly talked about like your struggles, but also you being like a first generation type person going to college and like how that feels and like changing your careers and things like that. And I remember being like, oh my god, she's such a boss, and like I want to be like that. And so your story and journey, like being public and open about it, was like really inspirational for me. So it's kind of cool that we've been like watching each other.
Oh wow. Okay, that's a really big honor. Thank you so much. Especially you're saying like, first of all, I want to be like you. I want to have those accolades. I want to have that strength that you face. So I really think that really means a lot to me, especially someone I do look up to, at least someone that like I have been watching to say that about me. That really means a lot. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So yeah,
Yeah.
like definitely
So
so like your story and things like that.
I had a lot of pressure from my family to do medicine or engineering, and so like coming from a brown family, they were like, "Here are your career choices. Like you can either be a pharmacist because it's like it's a road to a job that you'll definitely get, and it will always be a job that exists. Or you could do like some kind of engineering because lawyers, engineers, and doctors are like the only thing that brown parents will accept. And the end goal for a lot of women who grew up in a Pakistani culture is like, well, you need to do something that's not too long so that you can get married. So that
Oh,
when
I
you get
never knew
married,
that.
you'll have like kind of a good reputation because like she's a doctor or she's a pharmacist or so like medical careers are like high value marriage candidates.
Oh wow,
Um,
I never knew that about Pakistani culture. That's really interesting.
Sadly, it's a thing that's kind of going out of style, thankfully, now, like with people coming to this country and kind of wanting their daughters to be independent and educated. But I think it kind of still there when your parents come from Pakistan and they settle here. It's kind of at the back of their mind when they have a daughter where they're like, okay, eventually we need to get her married, and they're always stressed about it. So my parents were very like, you need to do medicine. We all are doctors. And I was like, I really hate science. Like, I'll study it. I think chemistry is cool, but I really don't want to be a doctor. Like, I don't want to deal with patients. And so I applied for like chemistry and biology to a bunch of schools, and then I sneakily applied computer science to NYU. And then what I really wanted to study was journalism. And my parents were like, that's not a real career.
Oh,
And
I
it
feel that.
involves a lot of traveling, and girls don't travel alone. And my dad was like, I've been a journalist. I really don't think it's the right field for you. And I was like, um, and so there was like a food strike where I refused to eat for like a day. And like, when the applications were coming back and I was like, look, I got accepted for journalism. My parents were like, it's not happening. You're not going to Columbia. It's in Harlem. Like, we're not going to let you live there. We're not going to let you commute there. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to college. But then NYU deferred me to NYU Poly. It was like if you applied to the NYU like engineering program, they were like, "Hey, we have an engineering school association." And I thought it was a good compromise because my dad was like, electrical engineering. I guess that's probably okay. Like it's a career, it's not journalism." So we went to NYU Poly like the day before school started, and we were like, "Hey, I got an admission letter, but I didn't respond to it. Is there anything you can do? Like school starts next week." And I remember them being like, "This is very unconventional. We can't just show up and be like, I want to get admission." But my dad was very like charismatic and charming, and he like sat with her in that like admissions building for like an hour and came out and was like, "You're in. Here are your documents. Here's your dorm room number. Like, you're all set to go." And I was like, "Oh my God, how do you do these things? This is not allowed. This is not how you get into college." And so I was like, okay, but it was a compromise, and so I was okay with it. But a year and a half into electrical engineering, I failed physics one. And then I failed physics one the second time I took it. And that's when I had to sit down with the counselor, and I was like, I don't know about this electrical thing. I don't think it's working. And she was like, "So what classes do you like?" And I was like, "Well, I took this like intro to Python class and this robotics class, and we did programming, and that seemed really cool. And it was like exciting. There's like problem solving." And she was kind of like, "Do you want to switch to computer science? Like, is that a thing you want to do?" And I was like, "Maybe." And at that time, a lot of my peers who had come in on the electrical computer engineering major were thinking about switching down to, not down, bad thing to say, but like switching to computer science so they could do more of the programming and less of the circuitry. And so I kind of had those conversations with them, and we all switched on the same semester. But yeah, that's how I kind of ended up with computer science, and I ended up happy there. But it was definitely not the thing that I was like, one day I'm going to be a programmer. Like that was not a life plan.
It's just interesting because like it really seems like it came out of like just like circumstances, things just happen. I mean, that's what life is. It's so funny. You start out one thing and it takes you on like a whole different journey. So it's really interesting to hear that story from you. Because for me, looking on the outside, it seems like this is like what you were meant to do. So it's really interesting to hear that like, wait, this is not what you started out with. You actually started out wanting to do journalism, wanting to do electrical engineering, and then you're like, no, wait, computer science is a thing. If it makes you feel any better, I also failed physics one, and that's why I decided to become a lawyer. but like no, but I think like that's really cool. I think like I have like a slight interest in programming myself. I took this is like I don't want to say computer science language, but like I did front end stuff like some HTML, some CSS. I really found it interesting. And I see that you work a lot with, and I did some research on it, but you do a lot of work on Drupal. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's not a language, right? That's more of like a website development
It's a
software.
framework. Yeah. It's
Framework.
like a
Okay.
collection of stuff you can put together.
Okay. So I see like you've been like you've worked with that throughout your like most of your career from like college and things like that, especially in the public sector. So I'm as someone who is interested in working for government, as someone who's interested in working in politics, I recognize that technology plays a huge role in how we serve our constituents, how we run a city, and things like that. So from your experiences with like working on Drupal and like just explaining for the viewers like what Drupal is and also like how does the intersection of technology and government kind of work and play together and things like
So Drupal is what we call an open source framework. It's a collection. It's like a core library that has some functionality. to build a content management system. So basically, the back end of a website where you can, create content, add members, edit posts, have permissions. We like to think of it as like Lego blocks because you can basically customize a Drupal website in however pieces you want. You can basically make whatever you want with it. And it's built mostly in PHP, some JavaScript. It has a bunch of languages that are connected within the framework. And it's very popular in the public sector because, as you might know, like public sector websites have a lot of needs. And, when you're serving constituents across different broadband types, people in different languages. So these sites need to be like multilingual, fully accessible, triple or double A accessibility standards. They need like massive editing capacity because you've got these buildings of people that need to upload content. And so Drupal proves to be that like flexibility and customizability that governments need, like municipal and federal as well. And so for me in school, I think towards my like second to last year, I discovered a fellowship at Microsoft, the Civic Tech Fellowship. And that's where I learned like what civic tech is. And I think there's a quotation from someone I worked with, Matt Stempeck, where it's tech for the people, it's tech for good. And it's the idea that, you can take your technology skills to the public sector. And it doesn't have to be, by working in government, which isn't always feasible for people given the salary or the location. But even just like on a volunteer basis, like build things that communities need that government doesn't always have the capacity to build. And so for me, it was like, I'm going into government. I'm going to work there. I'm going to suffer there. I definitely had a very idealistic look of what working in civic tech was going to be like. And I learned some hard lessons about burnout and, like it looks a certain way when the projects are completed and, it looks very much like the private sector where it's put together, but every day is like a fire. Sometimes it's a really bad shit show. But I had some really great teams in the public sector and I think people were all there for the same reasons. And so it was kind of like, this is really great work that I do. And everybody is really motivated because we're doing like real change. But eventually you're like, oh no, the balance is getting skewed. I can't do this anymore. So although I work in the private sector now, I definitely needed like a break from being on fire all the time. But there's also this moment, like I remember sitting on a bus in Boston and in front of me, two people were on their phones looking at the Boston.gov website. And they were using like a map that we had built to find parking during a snow emergency. And I was sitting there like beaming out of just like shining. Like, they had no idea that I put that page together. But also I was just sitting there like, this is why I do what I do. And, a moment like that can keep you going for several months,
No, I agree. I think everything about the burnout in government, it's like you do 12 hours of work for little pay. It's like a joke that I have for a lot of my folks who work in government. It's tough, but I think like at the end of the day, like you said, that's a great point. Like seeing two folks who use your website, the things that you like built up for everybody. And I agree, like I think being in New York City government, I'm not sure what they use to make their websites and things. Like I'm not really familiar with the tech and the framework they use there. But it's so important, like you said, like accessibility plays a huge role. Like in a city like Boston, like New York, where there's people who speak multiple languages, and you want to make sure that everyone has like the access to getting the right information, right? You don't want to just limit it to people who speak English or people who speak like Spanish, but you also want to make sure like every single constituent has the right to receive that information. And like that's amazing work. I'm even learning from you right now. Like I didn't know how much really went into it. Something as like for like a lot of like people like lay folks who aren't in tech or things like that, they're just like, okay, it's just another website. But like to think about it like in an accessible way, like to think about, okay, what do we need to make this like available for every single person who lives in the city and for people to actually use it. So like thank you so much for like informing me on that, and that's awesome. So like I think back to accessibility, one of the biggest things that you kind of talk about with your career is diversity. In fact, like you won an award from the Women's, and I'm gonna hopefully I still remember the name, the Women in Communications and Technology Canada So like you did eventually move to Canada, and you had a career there in Ottawa, I think London and Ottawa,
Yes.
and you did like you were so you won an award for the Rising Star Award to celebrate your work in diversity in tech, and you also participate in different like Drupal like Drup I don't know Drup am I messing up with Drupal conferences, and you do talk about diversity in such a creative, fun way. So why is diversity in tech like so important, and like I want to hear more about that, like your like that side of your activism and advocacy.
Yeah, I think I kind of fell into it. I went to a Drupal conference and there was like a casual meeting session of diversity and inclusion. And someone who I really admire now, Nikki Stevens, was kind of leading this little like circle group. And we were all sitting in the circle, and she asked us, they asked us, why did you come to this topic meeting? And I remember like we went around the room and I was like listening and I felt really emotional. And when it came to me, I was like, I don't really know. I've always thought about this, and I've always kind of been a token person throughout like college and my career. And like, I haven't really had the words to like express what that feels like. And I maybe haven't talked about it, but this is something I want to talk about. And I want to be here because I feel like in this conference of 3,000 people, I am the only me. And like there is no other hijabi. I don't see one. And so it was just I was like there trying to articulate that I wanted to be represented in some way. And I think Nikki just took me after that, and they were like, I'm putting together a diversity and inclusion working group. It's volunteer based. We think that like this Drupal community, like this online community of contributors and like content editors and designers, like these are conversations they need to have. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't really know what you want me to do here. And they were like, well, it's simple. We're going to have a website. We're going to have meetings every week. And here are the things we're going to talk about. And so they would give me a little bit of work to do, like every few weeks. We would have like an initiative where we would say like, oh, big conference is coming up. Let's have a booth. Let's make pronoun stickers to give out. Like, let's do something that's on fire. That we really feel that the organizing association should be doing, but because they're not reflective of that diversity conversation, if we do it on the grass, like on the ground, we're hoping that like it'll catch on and then eventually get absorbed into like the institutional structure. And I think what started as me like just attending this topic meeting as like an outsider and like not really sure what I wanted out of it, to be honest, turned into like them giving me the leadership of this group and me deciding like here's what my vision is for this little tech community. I say little because there's like all these other frameworks that have their own communities, and over the past like year and a half I poured so much of my life and personal time into this diversity and inclusion group. And like working late nights, I remember like my dad would be like sitting on the sofa being like, are you done yet? And I would be like, no, I'm putting together an agenda. We have a call tomorrow. We're going to talk about why pronouns are so important. I also need to do, like a paper on blah, 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 because they want to know why the DD&I diversity and inclusion group is so crucial to the conversations we're having. And like, I'm also putting together like a proposal for a prayer room conference. And my dad was like, your free work never ends. And I was like, Dad, you don't understand. Like, I'm taking up space and I have a voice and I feel really good about the work I'm doing. And my dad was like, but I always listen to you. And I think in the beginning, like my journey through these conversations leading up to that award were very much like my conversations with my dad, where my dad was like, I don't understand what's changed. And I was like, yeah, I don't think anything's changed because I'm a walking token person. But I think what's changed is that like I am now speaking about my experiences and I'm like talking about them. And I think for my family, like they grew up hearing these things, but I never like shared them with the outside world. And so now it was like me speaking to people that I worked with about things like they had no idea about. And so I don't know, it's been a really long journey, I think, coming from a person who didn't understand what the word privilege meant. Like definitely felt it and experienced it, but did not know how to use the word in a sentence, to like someone who could talk about it. is like a big, full circle kind of. And I think the award was given to me at a time where I was like at the peak of, like I was working, I was like a representative in many technical spaces. I was talking about a lot of these conversations and like volunteering a lot of my time, and slowly burning out as well. And the award kind of validated that, I was doing something that was useful and it wasn't like my like selfish monologue to the world. And so I don't know. It also gave me like a platform where people had started listening, and like not the people who, like if you listen to me, it's kind of like one underrepresented person listening to another underrepresented person, and sharing the validity of our experiences. But if like a white man who's the CEO of a company wants to have a 15-minute check-in every month because he's not sure he's doing a good job, that to me is like success. And I think the award, sadly, is what gave me the credibility to have those conversations. And so I've gone from like doing all of the things to like now narrowed down to like having the conversations that I want to have, because now I'm like recognized, which is really sad, but that is how this world works.
No, thank you so much for sharing that story. Like, I think like it's a lot of my guests that have come on for past episodes. So I've had the privilege to interview many amazing folks of color, black and brown folks on my show. And for some reason, like not for some reason, there is an obvious reason, but like the biggest like overarching theme between all my guests, and these are guests of like different occupations, different like backgrounds, but they all kind of said the same thing, like perspective matters, especially for underrepresented populations. Um, and like you said, taking up space. Like what you're doing, these conversations may seem like, oh, like everyday things, but like they're not for a lot of folks. Like you're saying, a white man may not know that it's important to devote a central prayer space for folks who are Muslim, or to have like certain lunch times, like long conferences. I went to well, like 2 summers ago, I went to a conference for a nonprofit, and they did a really great thing where they had really early and really late dining times because it was during Ramadan. So it was like for I apologize if I pronounce these wrong. Iftar and suhoor for those hours, which was really accommodating. And it's something that like I think, like you said, like a non-Muslim or a white man or someone who isn't from that background wouldn't be able to pick up on, and like having these conversations, ensuring like once again accessibility and having that perspective to
Yeah,
kind of
I
pitch
had a
in.
horrifying experience once at a mini conference where we all were at a welcome dinner, and someone in a wheelchair showed up to attend, and there was no wheelchair accessible entrance to this restaurant. And we're all sitting at this table with our food, and we find out that this is happening, and I was like, this is the moment where you're like, which side do I want to be on? Like, do I want to now empathize with the organizer because they forgot, or do I just want to leave? And I remember like everybody like feeling really uncomfortable in the moment, and I was like, these are the situations for which I have been like talking and advocating, and like if I don't get up now and go have dinner with that person, like I don't feel like I've aligned with my values. And like I think what ended up was like we all left. I think some of it was peer pressure, when you see a lot of people get up and leave, and like but that was a moment that I keep filed away when I talk about accessibility, because it was humiliating, even though I was not involved in the organizing at all, but just being a part of the collective that made it impossible for this person to have dinner with us was just like, how did we end up here? And like, why did we not plan better? And so that is one thing that I always think about. And then the other one is I gave a talk at Michigan University, and during the talk, I must have mentioned, like, make sure you have a prayer room or even a quiet space. People need to get away from the socializing of an event. They need a space to, like, maybe do yoga. Maybe they want to meditate. Maybe they, put coloring books there so that they can, like, cool down. People are introverts. But one of the professors came up to me and he was like, I have a lot of students, and I know there's, like, Ramadan and they have a different schedule. Like, what should I do? And I was like really conflicted. I was like, I could be your expert and I could give you like ideas and advice about what I think you could do, but I don't study at Michigan State. Like, I don't know the state of classes or universities or the campus. And I told him, I was like, when I got here, the organizer of the conference gave me an access pass to the MSA. So the Muslim Students Association had a room, and they found out that I was a speaker and were like, here, give her a pass so she can use our lounge space to like pray or relax or sit in there or like meet other Muslim students. And so I told the professor, I was like, your MSA is so on it that they gave me a pass to use their space. You should go talk to them because they know best, like what your classes are like, what the campus is like, what services are being provided. Like, don't go to an outsider when you have people in your spaces that have the experiences that you need. And I think it was a really humiliating conversation where he wasn't really happy with what I was saying. But for me, it was like, should I take the easy route and just give him answers because I'm so uncomfortable with this conversation? Or should I like be really on fire and tell him like the honest truth that like I'm not the expert. Don't Outsiders can't solve your problems. Like you have all the right people. And so like those two are moments where I felt like I was challenged, like as an advocate, where I had to decide like, do I have the capacity to be really strong about this or be really weak about this? And I think I've definitely had scenarios where I've taken the like lukewarm option. But my cheeks are heating up. I remember these two situations. I was like, oh shit, like now I have to align with all the bullshit I talked about. Otherwise, there's no point.
No, I think like I thank you for like being so honest about these stories. I think even for every person, no matter how like socially conscious you may be, it can be kind of hard to practice what you preach sometimes because at the end of the day, like you said, right, you feel uncomfortable. You have to have these uncomfortable talks. They're not easy conversations to have with folks,
Yeah.
and like it's like you and going back to credibility, like you said, like unfortunately, it took an award to have to let you have that credibility as opposed to you just having these experiences is that alone should be enough to have credibility. And then like to your second point about like talking to the Michigan State students at the MSA there as opposed to talking to you, I think like I had actually just came off from an episode where a colleague, like not a colleague, a friend of mine who goes to law school, she's Latina, and she talks about like how Latinx students and Black students had to come and really advocate for their needs at their school. So it's like it's it kind of sucks that like for people who Black and Brown folks, for underrepresented folks, it's like you have to be the what is it, the uncompensated labor and put in all your stories and you unlock that trauma to help people. But yet you're not given the credibility, right? Like the person you spoke to at that school has a great resource of students there who could like help them, make their school more accessible, make their school more accommodating, especially from their Muslim students and their Muslim student body. So it's like it kind of
Yeah, I
sucks
think
that people have to like speak out. Yeah,
he came to a keynote speaker to
yeah.
ask a question, but he didn't like recognize the credibility of his Muslim students. And that was like a really sad dichotomy where I was like, oh, recognition does help, but also this is really shitty. Like,
Yeah, and it's annoying because like we see this in like spaces, right? Like in nonprofit spaces, it's always like if you have like a certain label, like a certain nonprofit label, like you're credible. But like there's folks on the streets who are organizers who are constantly speaking out against like injustices who are not getting the same leverage. I mean, the same platform because they don't have the credibility of like something that's like in mainstream, like like whether I don't know, like a big nonprofit backing them or like a big media outlet backing them. You know what I mean? It could be one person on
yeah,
Instagram, and it just kind of sucks.
unfortunately, this also happens with civic tech. So,
No.
when you come into government as this like young, fresh technologist, programmer, they treat you like, you can solve all the problems. But the reality is that like, Code for America, for example, like they have a phrase that says build with, not for. And so it's like when you're going into these spaces in government specifically to like build technology for them, like remember that these people have been working to the best capacity, and are the subject matter experts of their municipality or their state level government. And like you're not just going there to like build the thing that you think is right for them. Like you're there to build together with them the thing that they need. And so like with a lot of these like parachute drop in programmer kind of positions, I've really had to navigate that like that gold star Mario treatment you get when you go in because they're like, oh my god, help her. And so yeah, it's like having very hard conversations where you're like, yes, and I'm actually not here to solve all your problems. This is a collective effort. Like I can't build you anything if you don't work with me on this. And unfortunately, not everyone understands build what's not for. And so that's what creates a lot of resentment for like, oh, we just spent money on this new project and these three young women are here to build it for us. Ooh. But yeah, so like some of the things that you're talking about as far as credibility, I think happened a lot in my like tech in government career as well, where people are they're just they've kind of lost faith in it sometimes, and I think there's a tendency to believe that like technology will solve all problems, and that is like not the case. Like people, I don't know, like government is behind, government is not up to date, but then when you actually go in there like and realize how many problems they're solving, like the scale is huge, and just like being able to build something at that scale that's also kind of, you know, fashionable and nice and technical, like is really hard. And there's people there every day who have dedicated their lives to public service. You can't just go in there and be like, I'm a technologist, I can fix this. And so that, you know, my first time in government, I was all like, I'm the developer, how exciting. I have all the answers. But 3 years later, or maybe like 30 days later, I was like, never mind, I am not the expert in anything. Y'all keep a city running. I have no clue. Yeah.
I really like that though, like the build for, no, build with, but not build for,
Or
because like you're saying like, so like you came into a position where, you know, like you're a New Yorker coming to Boston, and you know there's Bostonians there who know much more about how their city runs, what their city needs, and things like that. We see that in New York too, where there's like I can see a parallel with like civic tech and just legislation and policy, where a lot of folks in New York City who are in like policy roles are people from outside of New York City, and they're coming in like, yeah, I have the expertise because I went to X, Y, and Z school, policy, law school, and I can do it. Yet they're not really understanding what it is, like what the constituents really need. So I really respect your mindset of like, yes, I'm a technologist. Yes, I have the skills that you need and for me to build a website, but I acknowledge and I'm willing to step aside and work with you to build something that's really like accessible for your city. So I really like I appreciate that mindset, because not a lot of folks have that mindset. You know, once you get the credibility, they're like, "Well, I can do it. Let's do it my way," not recognizing that the space they're entering may not be like they might not have all the answers, like you said.
Yeah, I
So it's
think
like
I
really
learned most
cool.
of this from like my heroes in the technical space, and like if I had to like name organizations, that would be like Code for America, and then I later went to work for Code for Canada, or like, you know, the United States Digital Service, and like people coming out of these organizations are the ones that are like starting these conversations. And you know, as we were talking, I'm like, yeah, this also applies to like, you know, indigenous communities in Canada. Like, don't just build them things and give it to
Oh
them,
yeah.
you know, like build with them. And so it kind of applies to everything, where it's like acknowledge the experiences of the group that, you know, you're doing something for. And like I think maybe doing those two things at the same time, like doing the diversity work in open source and doing government work, like kind of worked really well together for that reason, because it was about like validating experiences. Like at the core of the work, it was like, what do you need? What do I need? How can we do these things? And it was just kind of like, if I had a growing up story, it would probably be like build with, not for.
No, I really love that. Like I'm about to like I don't want to like steal someone's like work, but like that's definitely like going to be like a catchphrase that I'm gonna like also live for, especially as someone who wants to do public service, who wants to go into policy. This is something that you know, like that's great. I think that's like a mindset that I should also go into, even though I'm not a tech person. It's something I can definitely use and bring into. So thank you for sharing that with me. So I know that like so you had this amazing career, and I know that like you mentioned this person like your dad. I think your father's played a big role in your life, and you know, unfortunately, I know I'm so sorry for this. You did recently lose him in like a year ago, and you know, you talk a lot about like grief, especially on your Instagram, and you like being. Thank you so much for being so transparent and vulnerable about the story. Not even just like with our hour right now, but like just in general with your Instagram, talking about that. And I know, like, right now, you know, we're in the era of COVID-19, and like, there's a lot of grief, feelings of grief, whether it's a feeling of loss of like a loved one, someone who's sick, a loss of like just the world in general, and how we kind of have to move on with, you know, not move on, but how we have to grapple with that type of grief, whether it's in different, like whatever, however it affects the person. So I just wanted to hear your experiences of like how you dealt with grief, especially with someone that you love so much, someone who means a lot to you, and how you dealt with that. You continue to grieve, and like I think one of the things I love about your story, it's not just like, okay, I'm gonna get like a month to grieve and then call it, I put a bandage on and I'm gonna be better. It's like, oh no, I love that you talk about, yes, it's an ongoing up and down process. So if you don't mind like talking about that a little bit, and how that has helped you, especially in the, like that mentality has now helped you in this type of like, new environment of COVID-19.
Yeah, I think before losing my dad, my life was my career and my dad. And so it was just, I would say it was like 60% my dad and 40% my career, but my dad was so focused on my career that like it's probably more or less the same thing. And I think when I lost my dad, I also was like on the last month of my fellowship with Code for Canada. My apartment lease was ending. Like I had to like maybe move, get a new job. And so like all things were ending at the same time. And for me, that was just kind of like, I already lost the biggest thing in my life. Like, how much more am I going to lose for the next couple weeks? And I think the first month I really spent as like, I have a month to wrap up this fellowship and a lot of work to do. I'm just going to gun it. And then after that, I will process my grief. I promise. But that's not how it happened. I think it was just a pendulum. Like, there are days where like I didn't get out of bed. All I did was like brush my teeth and eat. And like I started reading a lot of blogs and listening to a lot of podcasts about grief where people were like, have non-zero days, like do one thing and be proud of yourself for it because you've gone through like massive loss. And I got really suffocated in my apartment in Ottawa at the time because my dad had lived there with me. And so I like rearranged furniture, I threw stuff away. There was a lot of like extreme behavior. Like I either ate nonstop for 24 hours or I didn't eat, or I like rearranged all the furniture and Marie Kondoed literally everything in my closet and then went back to the garbage dump to get it back because I immediately regretted it. So there was a lot of like doing things that I think instead of like acting on impulses, I needed to like nurture myself, and I wasn't doing that because I didn't know how to do that. So a lot of it was like, oh, self care, that thing I've been ignoring for my career. I guess that was important. And like taking time off. And so I had like the privilege of being able to like not work for a month and a half. And I decided to like go to the West Coast, and I like started in Vancouver and just traveled down the coast for a couple of weeks. Mostly went to like beaches. I went on a really long drive, even though I was scared of renting a car. But some of that was just like me needing to process and be by myself, and have like new experiences that were not tied to my dad. And I think just, getting rid of certain patterns, like, having to call my dad every hour, like figuring out if I can call other people. And so some of it was like, what are my daily activities and how can I adjust them? What are the things that remind me of dad? Can I put them away in a box? Is that do I have the capacity to put them away? Like, what can I handle? Like to this day, like my screensaver on my phone is a picture of my dad and I. And often I go back to like something as little as that and I'm like, should I change that? Because I look at it, I might feel sad, but I also look at it some days and I feel happy. And so there's this like dichotomy in grief where it's like you can be really happy and still miss the person that's gone. You can be really sad. You can be really angry and resentful, and you can feel those things at the same time. And as someone who is very clear, like either I do a thing or I don't do a thing, or I like a thing or I don't like a thing, it's the hardest thing to be uncertain and in the middle. Like, when is this gonna end? I don't know. And so a lot of that was like me getting comfortable with getting uncomfortable all the time, and just feeling things. And not everyone, people have kids. I like spoke to some of my cousins that had lost their mother the year before, and he said to me, he was like, "I have three daughters. Like, I don't." I don't have the luxury to sit in my room and cry all day. Like, I need to move on, and like my daughters are the reason why I can still function. And I was like, well, I don't have a thing. Like, what do I focus on? And he was like, well, you have a career. Like, don't just throw your job down the drain. Like, focus on your career. And I was like, I don't really know if the career is what I want anymore because I did that for dad. And so there, a little bit of it was like, all of the things that I do for dad, all of the things that I do for me. And, kind of expanding this list uh, was the hard part where it was like, what are the things that I need to do for me? And I don't think I figured it out yet. I'm still working through some of it. There are days where like the whole day goes by great and maybe I think of dad in a happy way. And then there's days where like somebody sends me a Pooh Bear gift. And Pooh Bear is something my dad and I like used to send each other a lot because we watched the Winnie the Pooh when I was little. And then I'm like sitting in my bedroom sobbing for 4 hours at 3 in the morning, like can't sleep. And then, having to be like, hey, can I have the morning off? Like I'm not feeling well. I've had a lot of sick days. But thankfully, like I work with a manager who gets it. And it took us a while, I think a couple of weeks, where I was like, sick day, don't want to have a one-on-one. Sorry, don't feel like talking. Where he switched from corporate mode to he told me about a loss that he had experienced. And we kind of like both kind of connected and cried over it. And I think that helped us like break down the barrier. I think as underrepresented folks, we're like, we have to be together at work. We don't want to cry during a meeting. Like that's just going to lower my credibility. And I've been working on that for years. And so that allowed me to be like, yeah, no, I'm having a really hard time. I need the day off. And he got it. And like, we didn't have to share that with the rest of the team, which I appreciated because it didn't like make me look weak. I'm weak on my Instagram, but not on my LinkedIn. It's a balancing act. But I don't know. And then when COVID happened, there were a lot of posts by people who talk about modern loss and grief that were talking about like, oh, the world is grieving the loss of routine, the loss of normalcy, like the loss of things that they were used to, and kind of the loss of their norms. Meanwhile, we don't feel really shell shocked by it because we have lost the most important things to us. And so it's like, welcome to the grief club. Welcome to losing everything that makes sense. Waking up like without a sense of understanding anything. And I think that has really felt kind of like this, like the grief community has really opened up and like accepted everyone and been like, welcome to how we feel every day. And it's been great for me because it's kickstarted some conversations with people who I think were like not comfortable talking to me about my dad. I've seen like a lot of friends like awkwardly broach the subject, and I'm like, no, just ask me for a memory. I love to talk about my dad. But now people want to talk about like, I feel so lonely at home, or I feel really resentful because I can't leave the house. And I'm like, hey, I can, I can totally understand. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of broadened the conversation a little bit, which I like because I want to talk to more people about it and process together. But it's hard.
Oh, definitely. Like it is like definitely a difficult conversation to have to. Yeah, no, and like I think like that's like a really great story for you to share. Like, people are like grieving for something. You know what I mean? Like it's whether it's like a loss of a loved one or like a loss of schedule or like feeling like you're stuck at home. Like I definitely felt like I don't want to compare. Like I mean, my grief is like really nothing compared to like losing a loved one. Like I'm really privileged to not have faced that yet. But like there is that like gut punch feeling like, oh, like I'm in the process of looking for new jobs, and like all of a sudden jobs are like they're not hiring. So I'm like, oh my god, like how much longer do I have to wait to like get to go to a new job? Can I move on with my life? And like it made me kind of really, really shaken up for like the first couple of weeks of like COVID-19, and like it's. I think like I really respect the fact that like I don't want to say you're not weak at all for sharing this on Instagram. Like I mean, it feels that way, especially like as like women and women of color. Like we have to keep it together. We have to make sure we're like always in tip top shape. But it's so hard because of like we already have all this trauma from like societal nonsense, and then you have like other things to like put in. You're like, okay, like I don't. We need to also like self care ourselves and like to take care of ourselves. But like it's hard to be vulnerable. Like even for me, like it's really hard for me to express a lot of my feelings. It's really hard for me to like step into that place of vulnerability. and to talk about hard feelings. You know, like grief isn't an easy subject to talk about.
Yeah.
Whether, like you said, like it's hard. Like your friends are tiptoeing around it. I think like it's hard to talk about that with somebody, and the fact that like you're being so vulnerable about it, I think like shows for like a lot of people like we're not alone in this. This is normal. This is like okay to feel like this because someone on the other side also feels the same way. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and
I
then you
had
talk
some
about like
friends
yeah,
reach out to me and say like, "Thank you for sharing your grief journey. Like, I just lost like a grandmother or someone, and like I was thinking about or a pet, and I was thinking about all the things that you posted, and I was just like thinking through them, and I was like, yay!" Because I post them, I think mostly for myself. Before grief, Instagram was like food and travel and socializing with the same core people that engage with you. And I think after grief it was just like there are people who are watching, therefore I am not alone. Like that was my thinking, and I was like, I love to like talk to people to process my feelings, but when I can't do that with people I just met in California, I can just post it to Instagram, and then my friends engage with it, or like coworkers that I used to work with engage with it and share their stories. And so it's kind of been like call a friend lifeline kind of thing for me, where it's like I put it all there to like get it off my chest. But then it also comes back to me in positive ways because people are like, "Hey, do you want to chat?" And I'm like, "Yes." Was it obvious? Like,
and it's like so like I think social media plays. A lot of people don't like social media, but I love social media for that reason itself. Like you're saying, like you're sharing your story because sometimes you don't know who to tell, and you just like throw it out there in like the void. But like people are watching. Like you don't know how many people. Like I didn't even know you were watching me. Like I was like, hold on, what do I post? Like all I do is like I don't know, put on like clothes and like do photo shoots. But I never knew like boxing. Yeah, I didn't even know like that was like such like an impactful thing. Until like talking to people, people were like, oh yeah, like I see you like box and like as a as a fat woman, that's revolutionary. And seeing someone
yeah,
of size exercise not for the pursuit of weight loss is it's revolutionary. And seeing someone post about grief and posting and like like that's stuff like I think social media like makes us feel less alone in a way. You know what I mean? It's like allowing people to look from look like your content's like out there, whether it's like if it's a private Instagram, it's like your couple followers, or like it's public, anyone can see it. And it's like it's so great to know like yeah, I'm not alone in this. Like whether I'm feeling depressed, anxious, I'm going through feelings of grief right now, I'm feeling this X, Y, and Z way. So it's like so amazing that you do this. And it's like literally why I wanted you to come on this show, because it's like you have not just your grief story, but like your all these accomplishments you've done and your story that you've been so transparent about on your Instagram and so like vulnerable and engaging. And that's something that's so respectful and comes from a place of strength. You know what I mean? I think that you're strong on Instagram and on LinkedIn. Like I think like it takes a lot of strength. It's something that even I'm still like working on. Like I can't process emotions well. Like I'm not the most emotionally intelligent person, but I'm working on it. And I'm like, working on being more vulnerable, being more open. But that fact that you do it with such grace and positivity and like, that's strength. And like I really do admire that you do that. So we're coming up on the hour, and like I want to like before we wrap up, I really want to thank you. This is such like a personal topic. I think it's one of the. I think this is one of the more personal topics that I've had to cover thus far on the show, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I think from your career, you definitely honored your father. From what I've seen on your Instagram, like you honored his legacy. This is it, like your career, your story, your strength. And like before we wrap up, I just want to make sure, like, do you have like anything you want to promote? Like, I usually have like people come in dropping their Instagram handle, if they're on an Instagram handle, a project they want to like I don't know, like anything in the Drupal community that we should know about, or like some last words that you want to share.
I've honestly been taking a break. So I guess,
And it's fine.
yeah, what I would share is like, if you need a break, take a break. I am currently working on zero things outside of work. I work and then I play Animal Crossing, and I work on my island, and I feel fucking productive because I build things and shit. And I
Honestly,
do
that's what everyone is
gardening.
doing. everyone's. I don't have Animal Crossing, but a lot of my friends do, and this is like the new wave of entertainment now. So
I
and
really
I'm
had to
glad you're
give
giving it a break.
myself permission to do nothing and to be okay with it. And I think I'm still doing nothing. So I'm not at the other side of it yet, but hopefully, like in a month or maybe a little bit more than that, I'll come back and be like, May, it worked. I'm feeling good and I have the capacity to work on things. I think, especially right now, people feel the pressure of like, I'm at home. I should be really productive. I should do a podcast. I should write blog posts. And I felt like that coming in. I was like, time for content. It's time to work on new projects. And, every time I started something, I was like, nope, I can't finish it. I'm paralyzed. I don't feel like doing anything. And so then I just decided, like, I'm going to watch TV and eat and play Animal Crossing. And at some point, I think I will reach the saturation level where I'm like, oh, I finally feel like doing shit again. And so hopefully we'll get there. But for all the people that are going to watch this and like need permission to not be productive, like, I give you that permission. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for for saying that. I think for a lot of us, especially folks of color, we need permission to rest, and I think thank you for that affirmation, Fatima. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye. So exciting.